Awesome. Thank you, Emily. Welcome. It looks like we're having a few more people join. I think we can go ahead and get started because I know we have quite a bit to cover today. So welcome. Thank you for the pivot last minute to allow us to go fully virtual today. If you want to flip to our next slide, Emily, our quote this morning is from one of my favorite books, The Count of Monte Cristo. And I liked this quote thinking about all human wisdom is summed up in these two words, wait and hope, which seems very fitting for this time of year and for things that are happening right now. Waiting and hoping, always hoping. That's a good motto for today. I wanted to give some updates. There you go. Thank you, Emily. We have a Senate Bill 39 that's in pause mode right now, but it did actually, since our last meeting, there was a substitute. So they were able to, of this bill has writing back at 5th grade and 8th grade. One of the things that we're looking at still is the date for Senate Bill 39. Were this bill to get if it were to get approved, currently, the date that the bill takes effect is May 7th of 2025. There's been communication and talks with people on the Hill.
Sid, you are breaking up, and we can't not hear you.
Darn it. Is it still cutting out?
You might need to go camera off.
Emily, can we switch? We'll try that. Does that work? Is that better? Okay. Okay, thank you. So sorry. I had some car issues this morning, but I'm just about back to my house. But the bill will take effect right now as of May 7th, 2025. They know that that date is an issue and that would be really hard for us to meet. So I know that there's been conversations with the sponsor of the bill as well as with other people that if this bill were to pass, we would be looking at an impossible deadline for that to start. So I know that they're aware of that, and that will be something that we're hope to see as this bill, if this bill would continue forward and if it were to pass. So that you can follow anything with the legislature on the Utah State Board of Education website. There's a bill tracker on there, or you can follow it on the actual state legislature website to follow along with anything that's happening with bills for right now. Okay, the next slide. Oh, there is a comment, which tests 9th and 10th. So as far as the language, if that bill were to pass, it would say that the assessment for 9th and 10th grade would be looped in with the same code as the 3 through 8. The procurement process and things like that would be to be determined as far as the actual assessment, but the requirements for the assessment about it being computer adaptive and course-based instead of grade-based would match, if that bill passed, would match what the 3 through 8th grade test is. Okay, so there wasn't really anything on the last board meeting from January for from February for assessments, but upcoming procurements, we have a couple of things in the pipeline. We're looking at extending all 3 of these contracts currently in June 30th, and so we're looking at some sole source procurement or extensions for the WIDA assessment, for the DLM assessment, and for Utah Composed Through Measurement, Inc. So those are things that we're looking at extending those contracts, and we'll keep you posted as those come up on our future board meetings. And we have just a little delay as we're going to our next slides. I wanted to give you an update of our January APAC meeting. We had multiple items that were discussed. Many of them were from the Accountability Tech Manual. The first event that was approved by the APAC committee were the students who participate in multiple courses for the same subject. So, for example, students who participate in 8th grade math as well as secondary math 1 courses. Previously, they were required to complete both tests. Our APAC committee voted that students would only have to participate in a single test subject, and that test would be from the more advanced course. So if, from the example that I shared, if students were participating in 8th grade math and secondary math 1 in the same year, they would only be required to participate in the secondary math 1 course. So that was something that was approved in our APAC committee. We had a couple other things that were discussed by about our EL multiple language learners, multilingual growth tables. One of the things that was approved was to add a row for students who are starting with a 4.2 composite but don't necessarily exit from being considered an EL student due to the multiple components to that exit. That was approved to add an additional row. A couple other things that they've asked us to gather some more information on were the baseline proficiency students who start their first year as meeting the requirements, but are currently not included in the EL growth indicator. So that's something that our APAC committee asked us to do a little bit more research on as to how many students that would impact students who maybe took a screener and were considered an EL student, but then tested out that first year. So having those students with a baseline proficiency, would we want them to count in the growth indicator? There was also discussion on long-term English learner students that go beyond 6 years of being considered an English learner. And that's something that there was no recommended action from our APAC group on. And then finally, we had growth tables looking at a new approach to calculating multilingual growth, and that's something that we're looking into more with our data and statistics team, and we'll bring that back to our APAC committee in May. I think I just have one more slide. And that is to welcome our newest employee. And I'll maybe ask Dallas if she'd like to introduce herself, but Dallas is our new elementary ELA assessment specialist. We're excited to have Dallas join our team. So Dallas, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself to everyone.
Yes, of course. So I'm Dallas, just like Sydney said, and I am very excited to be joining USB. I am trying to fill Teresa's shoes. So if you have any questions or any concerns or need help, please feel free to reach out to me at any time. I'm more than happy to help.
Thank you, Dallas. And again, welcome. We're so excited to have Dallas with us. And I think we are on to our next topic.
Hey friends, so I just have some general assessment information for you. Emily, go ahead and go to the next slide. So just a reminder, there was an update with participation codes that took effect at the beginning of this school year. That 201, the accommodated code that we've been using previously, has been replaced by the following codes. So we've got 210, 211, and 212 to help better delineate between which accommodations students are being provided while they take their assessments. So 210 is any accommodation that would not be a language accommodation. 211 is if there is a language accommodation like the Spanish adaptive assessment. And then 212 is if they are both, if both of those things are being utilized by the student. Our next slide is just your friendly reminder that the assessment and accountability task calendar is available for you, and you'll want to kind of keep track now. February, March, April, we're heading into our heavier testing season. So be prepared with all of the things that are on that list for you. A couple of other things that we wanted to remind you of, Emily, go ahead and go to the next slide, is that the assessment literacy modules are available for teachers Each module does take about an hour and 15 minutes to complete, and then teachers will use a reflection journal to go along with that. We just wanted to put this as a reminder for you as we've had some questions come in about assessment literacy resources that we have available, and so we want to remind you to share this with users in your LEA so that they can utilize those if they so choose. The next slide is just a reminder of what specific focuses are based on those. Just as a heads up, we recommend that participants complete modules 1 through 7 in sequential order, but 8, 9, and 10 can be done in any order following the completion of modules 1 through 7. Okay. Another tool we want to remind you of, go ahead and go to the next slide, are the formative assessment resources that we have available for you. A reminder with the Formative Assessment Toolkit. This is a great resource that has some fantastic things that are in it that you can even use as a guide for professional development. Tracy and I are working on a one-pager with this along with some other resources, and it will be coming soon. Just as a reminder with other formative tools, next slide, we have Utah Compose that is available for grades 3 through 12 to assist with writing. There are 4 different prompt styles that are available if you choose to use Utah Compose. And then we also have UTips on the next slide if you have teachers who are interested in creating their own assessments or for accessing the item bank. Just as a reminder, though, that the item bank has not been reviewed in many years, but things still align to current standards, even if they were aligned to previous standards. So they are available for teachers to use if they so choose. A couple of other things we wanted to familiarize you with are the science core guides. That's on their next slide. So the USBE science formative assessments are located on the science core guides. You just have to click on the core guide tab. They're available for K-8 as well as biology, chemistry, earth science, and physics. Scott, do you want to add anything about the science core guides?
No, just that they are a fantastic tool. A lot of people will ask us for our cluster specifications and how we develop them, and I always tell them go to the science core guides because we use those specifications to develop the core guides. And anytime someone says, "Well, I need to unpack my standards," I always say, "Go to the core guides. It's already been done for you." And that way you can get a leg up and get a head start. And so they are an extremely powerful tool to use. There's some great things in there.
Awesome, thanks. The next slide also provides links for elementary and secondary ELA core guides. So those are available if your teachers would like to use them. And then the following slide are formative tools specifically for grades 6 through 8. For math, they have some really great cluster style activities that have been created through our teaching and learning department that link to each of the math strands. So if you have teachers who are interested in those types of tools, please share those with them so that they can be better utilized with our students. And with that, we're going to move into RISE. Just as a little reminder, your state window is March 11th through June 6th. Oh, we skipped to Nate. That's totally fine. No, you're good. Go ahead and let Angela go.
Elise, are you sure it's not a problem?
No, you're fine.
Okay. Okay.
I'll come back. It's what I do best.
Thanks, Elise. All right. So I am going to go to my screen because I changed some of these slides. Well, I didn't change. I added. There we go. I am. Okay, there we go. All right, so I'm Angela. It's the NAEP report time from 2024. We tested 4th and 8th graders reading, math, science. We have reading and math results. So you may have already heard a lot of these results at the national level, so I'll go quickly through that. If you would just speak up or raise a hand or do something to let me know you have questions or type them in the chat. And Emily or someone, if you yell at me if there's a chat in there, because I can't see it the way I'm presenting. So here's the national level results. We had reading down at 4th grade. Reading grade 8 is down. Mathematics grade 4 is up. And mathematics grade 8 had no change, and that's national. Then we had the national level math. So for math, here we go. We went up with just a point, little increase. You can see that we had 15 states increase, 1 down, Utah flat, along with the rest of the nation primarily. Grade 8 math, flat. We had 4 down, 49 flat, and 0 increased at grade 8 nationally. You can see we're still in the same pattern. Our lower achievers, our 10th and 25th percentile, you see are flat at grade 4, 50th, little bump up, and then our 75th and 90th are creeping up again. Math grade 8, same results. We've got the lower percentiles decreasing, the 50th flat, and then the 75th and 90 creeping up a bit. Let's see, overall grade 4 reading nationally, we saw a decrease. We saw 5 down, 47 flat, none went up in 4th grade reading. 8th grade reading, we had a decrease nationally in the overall score. We saw 8 go down, Utah included in those 8. 44, no change, and none went up. Okay, and here we go. We're seeing the same thing. Our lower achievers are continuing to decline. And we even see a little decline at the highest achievement group. And then the 75th is down statistically at grade 4 reading. Grade 8, we see a decline in all these lower achievement groups, and we're flat in the upper groups nationally. Okay, so here's Utah's results. Utah, we're flat at 4. We're down at, in reading. Grade 8 reading is down. Mathematics grade 4 was flat. Mathematics grade 8 was flat. Okay, 4th grade mathematics results, we see where we are compared to the nation. We had a 242 overall score where the nation was 237. 2 districts outperformed Utah. 24 were the same as Utah, and 26 performed worse than Utah. Politicians seem to like ranking a lot, so we continue to rank in NAEP, even though it's a little misleading. If you bring it out enough decimal points, it'll put us in 5th place. But you can see from here that we're the same as 24 states. But if you rank them far enough out, there we go. We're in 5th place. Grade 8 math results. 1 did better than us. That was Department of Defense. And I don't think I said on the last one, Department of Defense and Maine. No, Massachusetts. Then we had, for the grade 8, we're in 4th place behind Department of Defense, Massachusetts, Wisconsin, Minnesota. Utah grade 4 reading results. 2 outperformed us. 24 the same as us, and 25 below us. You can see we ticked down a bit, but it's not statistically significant. And we're ranking in 7th place nationally. Grade 8 results. This is our most concerning area that we tested in NAEP. Utah had a decline, statistically significant decline in our grade 8 reading results. 3 states outperformed us, 20 the same as us, 28 below us. And we're in 8th place ranking. So that was really my biggest area of concern that I was looking at. So NAEP looks at a couple different things in reading. They look at gaining information, which is, textbooks, newspapers, getting informational text. And then there's literary experience, fiction, nonfiction, longer stories. Then they've got different types of responses. You can have extended constructed response, selected response, and short constructed response. And that selected response obviously is multiple choice, drag and drop. So when I dug into that, I'm like, okay, well, who went down in reading? Did everyone go down? Was it a specific demographic? Looking at, as I'm looking through, I'm not seeing that there were any race, ethnicity differences. So I dug into boys versus girls, and I see that our girls have declined, which we had 4 states that had females declining. I'm like, well, that's really interesting. So digging further into that, I looked at the boys versus the girls from 22 and 24 results, and I see that the boys are pretty consistent. So 22, we see the upper percentile. We see the 75th, 50th. It's all consistent. But the girls, we see a big dip from the highest, the 75th, the 50th, the 25th, and the 10th. Like, okay, well, kind of interesting. So I ran a stat sig test, and sure enough, the 50th and 75th percentiles showed that it was statistically significant between boys and girls, where we saw a major decline. So then I just looked at the girls. All right, let's look at the girls and see where we can see where it's going down. So we do see a statistically significant decline in the 50th and 90th percentile in girls. And I looked at race, ethnicity, and I'm seeing that it's white females that declined. I looked at all the percentile groups. So we've got boys on the bottom of each one of these up here. And then we see for the first time ever, we've closed a gap. And it's because the girls have dropped so statistically significant in every single percentile, 10th, 25th, 50th, 75th, and 90th. We see the girls declining. And so then I've just got some definitions here of, what it means to be advanced, proficient, and basic, and the different types of questions and what they're looking for. So in the gaining information, and I'm not going to go over all these, you can do that if you are interested, but there's also a ton of websites that I've linked in here where you can get into, let's see if I can do that from here. I don't know if I can. All of this is available to you. It's all public information. Let's see. Are you all seeing that? Nations report card? You are? Okay, good. Yes. You can go into the data tools here, and you can go into the data explorer. I mean, there's so much information. I mean, I've been doing this for 15 years, and I still can't manipulate all of this. There's a lot in here. And it tends to go really slow when we're on live. But you can pick your subjects. You can pick your grades. I'm just going to enter the main NAEP. It's going really slow today. Any questions? Does anyone see any questions in the chat?
No questions.
Okay,
So far.
thank you. So you can go into your subject, the grades you want to see, 4, 8, 12. You can look at any years you want to see, maybe. You can look at the subsections. Oh, it's really going slow. And it will allow you to look at the subsections, like gaining information, literary experience. You can look at the years you want to compare. You can then go in and look at if you want to compare it to the nation, if you want to compare it to a particular state. You can compare by regions. You can look at the variables you're interested in, race, ethnicity, gender, economic status, disability status, those that had 504 plans. There's just so much to look at. And then you can look at the achievement levels, percentages, average scale scores, and you can create reports. So there's a ton. If you have questions and you want to play in that and you are overwhelmed, just give me a call or an email and I'll help walk you through the website. But there's also there's a questions tool in here that you can look at items that were on NAEP in different reading areas. You can create quizzes. You can actually look at interactive tasks and sample questions. Again, tons of information if you have any interest. And I think that's it. Okay, can we just
Great. Yes, here I am. All right. So it is that time of year. We are just about to the spring summative window. We are on the cusp. You can feel it in the air. So I thought I'd give everyone a little roundup of rostering just in preparation. So just generally for any assessment, these are things to check for if you have a student that isn't rostering for assessment. Always allow 24 to 48 hours after making changes in your SIS, or when you enter a new student. It can take a minute for us to get your student information in UTREX and then to share it out with assessment vendors. Excuse me. Any changes to a student course record can cause them to disappear off rosters for a day. Changes to their birth date, their address, a change in their Scram record, if they change a course, if a term ends and a new term begins, all of those things can make some students disappear for a day. Any changes that you make in an assessment platform, say you have to add a Cactus ID to a teacher account in Tide. That's going to take an overnight upload to catch up. Also, fatal UTREX errors. If a record and a course, a student, a Scram record, any fatal errors will cause students to drop off of rostering. And a fatal error can occur at any point during the year. A student can be great until one day a fatal error crops up and they drop off rostering. So that's a thing to be aware of. Any time of year it can happen. Next slide. Okay, so for our specific assessment, if you have a student in a Acadience or RISE that has dropped out, you'll want to double check that their courses have the correct core codes assigned, that they are currently enrolled in a course. They must be actively enrolled in a course. Those changes of terms can cause students to drop off, as I already said. And they need to be enrolled in a course within their school entry date. So if their course entry date is 8/25, but they haven't entered school till 8/26, that's going to also be a problem. Also, it's a good idea to check and make sure that they are not marked as a 1% student. They will still roster for Acadience, apologies, but they will not roster for RISE if that 1% flag is marked for a student. For Utah Aspire Plus, it's a little easier. You just need to make sure they're actively enrolled in a school Does not matter what courses they are enrolled in. Double check, make sure they are not dually enrolled and that they might belong to another school in Adam. And also that 1% flag will drop a student out of Utah Aspire Plus as well. Next slide. So just a reminder of our tiebreakers for grade-based assessments, for course-based assessments. They are different. So you just need to be aware of that. We start at the top and go down. If you have a student enrolled in two schools, we start at the top of that list and go down to determine what school they will roster with. And next slide, please. So our dually enrolled students. It is possible for a dually enrolled student to test at any school. They can turn up as long as they have their SSID and they have a test code for Utah Aspire Plus. They have a test session ID for RISE. They can test. They do not have to be with their rostering school. But please, if you do test a student that is not on your roster, please notify the other schools that you're testing them so they know, so they are aware, so they aren't also trying to test this student. In Utah Aspire Plus, you won't be able to see the results of that student that tests at your physical location if they aren't rostered with you. Most likely, you won't be able to see them in RISE either, unless if you have one course that a student rosters with you, you'll be able to see their results for all subjects. Next slide. Alrighty, so our private homeschool Utah Fits All students. We have a lot of Utah Fits All students that are showing up, contacting LEAs because they want to take an end of year test. And that is great. We can do it. You just need to follow the guidance in the guide, which I have linked at the bottom of this slide. You just need to enroll those students with a basic amount of student information, put them in school 990 or 995, and they can roster for assessment. We only use school 990 and 995 for assessment rostering. You can, I think some LEAs enroll Utah Fits All students for other purposes. They don't report them to the state. They might put them in school 995. But you can put them in school 990 as well. So it should not affect their funding, the UFA students, to roster them in this manner. We've reviewed it. It seems like it's going to work just fine. Importantly, you do not have to go through this whole process if a student is enrolled at any public school in Utah. If they are enrolled just for PE at one school, you do not have to go through this process. Like we covered in the last slide, they can test anywhere. So it's really important to double check that a student is not enrolled anywhere. You will save yourself a lot of work. You double check in Data Gateway that this student is not enrolled anywhere. And I think, next slide. All right, here's your resources. Click on these links. You'll find the core code list. You'll find the student rostering manual with all the business rules. You will find that guide for rostering those private homeschool UFA students. If your IT or UTREX admin has any questions about rostering UFA students or private students, please have them contact me. I can walk them through it. We will get them set up. All right, I think that's it for me. Unless anyone has any questions. All right.
Right, good Thursday morning. Time for our WIDA updates. We are nearing the end of our access windows. I know I sound like a broken record, But please always remind your test administrators about good bubbling practices, okay? We don't want bubbling to cost your LEA money. So just make sure, especially with those kindergarten access tests, that those bubbles are being fully, circled in and everything. No check marks, no lines, no X's. So just make sure you're leaning into your 80s, 90s Scantron days, okay? And of course, our contact information is here. We're always there and available to help. Email is always going to be the fastest way to get in touch with us. All right, so where are we at? We have till the 7th. That means we have a little over 2 weeks left in access testing. You can still be adding students into AMS and adding them into test registrations, okay? You can still order additional test materials as well up until the 28th. So just as a reminder, because I do get this question quite a bit, when people are trying to order extra materials, they will just go to the materials order tab. You do need to make sure in AMS that you are under the additional materials tab to place that order. DRC is normally really good about getting those out ASAP. Of course, weather is always going to be a factor to consider. So if you know that you need some more materials, and you just want to place that order, please do that as soon as you can, since we only do have 2 weeks left in testing. Let's see. Also, do students who took the screener in the fall need to take the access as well by the 7th? Yes. So students identified this year as an EL, they have to take access. So generally, per our state's consolidated state ESSA plan, the question that I do get is, if a student enrolls now, right? Our consolidated state ESSA plan says after the beginning of the school year, the first 30 calendar days, the window to screen a student drops down to 10 school days. So you have 10 school days to screen a student. If a student comes during those, the last 10 school days of access testing, they don't have to take access because you technically have 10 school days to screen the student to qualify them. So technically, if the student comes 11 school days left in access testing, then that would mean you have 1 day technically to give them access testing. So do the best that you could in those instances. Again, that magic number is the 10 school days left in access testing. So any students identified this year, they do have to take access. So also please note that the 17th is the deadline for shipping. That's the postmark date. You can start sending stuff back now, and the sooner the better, because that means that DRC can start scoring those booklets for grades 1 through 3 in kinder as well. So we will encourage you to start sending stuff back. You don't have to do it all in one foul swoop. You can do a couple of pickups with UPS, and you should have your shipping labels in all of your materials. You can always contact DRC to get additional shipping labels if for some reason they were misplaced. If we're doing all online testing, there is nothing to send back. You might have to send back some of the test administration manuals and stuff. In your packing shipments, you should have a list, and it'll tell you what needs to be returned. If you're not sure, those lists of what need to be returned, it's all in AMS as well. DRC has fantastic customer service. If you have any questions about this, I would say reach out to DRC first and foremost. They'll probably be able to get you an answer even faster than I can. As we near our end of the test window and kind of gear up for our data validation, Marina and I will be giving more guidance on the steps for data validation. Just remember, you do have 2 weeks still to complete that, as was requested a couple years ago by the ADs. So we're nearing the end. Next slide. As we are nearing the end, what does that mean? Well, that means that scoring is taking place, and we are starting to get responses from DRC for the speaking and writing domains. So DRC always lets us know if there are any alerts, plagiarism, or suspected AI usage. So let's talk about these really quickly. Alerts are going to be student alerts that we get where, there's something concerning either in a speaking response or a writing response. And so we will contact your LEA and ask you to address it, and we will ask that you notify USBE once the appropriate people have been notified and the situation has been addressed. Plagiarism. Okay, please remember that we will also be sending out, Emily has started sending out plagiarism notifications. Please remember that if a student has an item, not the entire domain, but an item flagged for plagiarism, that item does not receive a score, okay? So it can affect their overall score for that domain, but it's only the item that does not get scored. It's not the entire domain. We ask that you please notify us, respond. Sid will be looking for those responses once the appropriate school personnel have been notified and the situation's been addressed. Most typically, this is going to be concerning testing ethics and good proctoring. So we ask that you investigate what happened. So plagiarism notifications are going to be starting to be sent out. Something new for this year, suspected AI. DRC has actually been monitoring for suspected AI usage for a couple of years. We are this year starting to notify LEAs when suspected AI responses are used. So one thing to note is that these items will still be scored. There is no definitive way to say that the AI was used. Please remember that WIDA Access, it is not a content test. This is an academic English language test. Any content the students need to use is given to them. There should be no reason for them to have to go and find answers on the internet or use AI to help them create responses, because all the content is there for them. And so it is their ability to understand or manipulate that academic language provided to them. We have seen suspicious responses in the last few years. And so we are going to start to ask, Emily, starting today, is going to start to alert LEAs of suspected usage, so you can start to be aware of this as well. As technology changes and advances, students are getting quite savvy. And so there are responses that were like, none of that content was actually available. And this is very, content-specific response that definitely sounds generated, from AI. And so we will send you the SSID and those responses to review and discuss with kind of like the same thing with plagiarism. We are not, with those ones, expecting a response from you. Again, the item will still be scored because, again, this is one of those tricky things. We can't necessarily prove it. There's so many different AI platforms out there. So please just be aware those are still being scored. We just want you to be aware because, again, this probably is going to be coming down to really good active proctoring issues that we want you to be aware of. I am starting to see some stuff in the chat. Participation, I see that from you, Alex. We're going to get to that conversation in a moment. And Dr. Blake, looks like you have some questions asking assessment directors. I love that you all are there to support each other. So yeah. And thank you, Natalie, for saying, yeah, reach out to me. So, all right. So I don't think I'm missing anything else in the chat. Okay. All right. So next, before we get to participation rates and all that kind of stuff, just wanted to make you aware of an upcoming AMS outage. I really hope y'all are not spending time on a Sunday in WIDA AMS. But if you are, please do note that there will be an outage on the 23rd this Sunday, so in the morning. So if you can't get in on Sunday, I actually am glad that you can't get in on a Sunday. Use your Sunday for yourselves, okay? And then this should just be a reminder of the district response layouts have been posted to AMS. So once you get your reports and everything, you'll know what all the different columns mean for all the data that you will be given for your district. Also, please do note there are still webinars that are available. They're free for you all. So that's the next slide. Sorry, Emily, didn't give you a heads up there. Here we go, free and optional. Interpreting score reports. So again, free, that one's coming up in March. More opportunities that are free through WIDA. Again, if you have questions, reach out to me or WIDA customer service. They're happy to answer any questions about these, but again, free and optional. And then USBE on the next slide, USBE and WIDA hosted professional learning opportunities. Again, all the self-paced online workshops still available. Our next PL will be about multilingual learners and disabilities. So that one you can still enroll in. That one is limited space, so please sign up in Midas if you do want to. It's almost full, but yeah, try to get into it if you can. And then this summer we'll be offering ML reading PL as well, and that one's still open in Midas as well. So next slide. Now we can get to it. There are 2 weeks left in testing as of tomorrow. So you have already seen Megan's firm but friendly reminder emails coming as please get testing done, because remember this testing is directly tied to our ML students' civil rights. So for the past 2 weeks, if you if you still have 40% or more access tests to complete, you've been getting reminder emails. Starting this Friday, tomorrow, we are going to be requesting that you respond with a plan to complete testing. Now, we do know that you might say, well, we don't really have a plan because we can't get the students in. We have been getting reports from various LEAs around Utah that many ML students have not been going to school in the past few weeks, and so getting testing done has been a challenge. We would like to encourage you to do as much as you can to reach out to those families, those students, to get them in and make sure that they know that this testing is connected to their civil rights. We have very strong student data privacy laws in Utah. Any information about EL students cannot be shared nor used to determine citizenship or immigration status. And I know that you are all probably having these great, good, safe conversations with families, but maybe to no avail. So right now, just as a reminder, Title III law and ESSA does say we do need to test these students and there is no opt-out as an option. So that is still the law currently. But we want to get your feedback and we would love this to be an opportunity for you to share your concerns because we do know that this is something that schools have been reporting and LEAs have been reporting. USBE, we and I specifically have been looking at these numbers on a daily basis. I can say as a whole, for Utah as a whole, we're actually pretty close to on track for testing as compared to previous years, believe it or not. Last year, we had a 94% completion rate for access testing. At this point, as of this morning, we are at 78% complete. Last year, at the end of our access testing for online, this is not Kinder Alt, okay, but online, we had 55,999 students complete online tests. As of this morning, so that was last year's full online access testing completion, so about 56,000 students. This morning, we currently are sitting at 51,088 students completing access testing. So we, on a whole, are looking actually pretty good. But we want to know, we want to give you guys some time to let us know your concerns. We love hearing from you and we want to support you in all ways. So how is testing going? What concerns do you have? What is working? If you have been able to get your students in, what did you do that you could share with our other assessment directors and LEAs that got our students in there if absent issues have been a concern? And then how can USBE support you in your access testing? So we just like to open it up. You can either put it in the chat or come off of mute if Emily deems you worthy of unmuting. So Emily, you may have to give powers, so you would raise your hand, I suppose, and Emily will give you the unmuting powers. But let's hear about concerns, what's working, how can we help you? The more we know, the more information we have, the better we can support you. And maybe if changes or different things are an option, those can be considered. So Sid and I are ready to hear your thoughts and feedback. For students who are taking ALT, they wouldn't show up in that completion rate, right? Yep, they would not show up because that's only online. I unfortunately can't say for paper stuff. I appreciate the conversation. I want to verify that you will allow for the possibility of an accountability appeal due to missing data beyond our control. It is only fair to allow for this. Thanks. Can a parent opt out her students to take access WIDA test? I can address the opt out and then I'll let Sid talk to the accountability. So remember, opting out of WIDA access is not an option. It is not on the parental exclusion or opt-out form. Schools also cannot provide a form to opt out because basically it would be saying we want to opt our students out of their civil rights. We do have a resource guidance posted that I will drop in the chat very soon here that addresses these concerns. Please just remind parents will always have the ultimate right. And if they're like, you're not testing my student and I will keep them home as a result, that's not going to do anyone any favors keeping the students out of school. Just let the parents know, say it is essentially the LEA's responsibility is to provide the opportunity to test. You're not going to physically force them to sit down and take a test, right? Just let the parents know we're going to still give your student the opportunity to test. If they decline that opportunity, there's not much we can do because we're not going to physically force them to take the test. You cannot provide anything for the parents to sign because a parent could always say, I didn't know exactly what I was signing. And of course, document all communication with those parents that are really pushing to opt out. So Sid, let's speak to the accountability question from Hal, and then I will be looking at the chat here.
Yeah, thanks Hal for bringing up that question. It's something we've been discussing internally about possibilities and what would be the steps that we would need to take if there were to be considered different options if we have gaps in who is participating in the access assessment this year. So it's things that we're continually discussing. It's something that we decided to take a look at as we continue. As Megan said, as far as participation at this point, we're actually pretty on track, but it's something that we're continuing to monitor and something that we will continue to monitor as the rest of the windows open. And as we start to look at particular places, if there are issues with participation and large issues that would impact the data for a particular school. It's something that we're continuing to talk about with our accountability team. So to be determined, but thanks for bringing that up. And it is something I want you to know that it's something that we've been discussing internally as well, to discuss what the possibilities would be if there are issues with participation and students just not testing. So something that we're continuing to discuss, and we'll keep you posted as we get closer to the end of the window and as the window closes, determining impacts of participation on outcomes of the assessment.
Thank you, Sid. Other comments in the chat, Ashley, the spacing issue, DRC is very aware of this, and this was not a DRC caused issue. It was actually a Google Chrome update that took place that created the spacing issue. I have sent out in several AD memos and also in our previous AD meeting the how to remedy this. We very much apologize, and so does DRC, about this spacing issue that was caused by the recent Chrome update. But if you need those directions again, I would say either quickly go back to previous AD memos where the step-by-step instructions have been included, or you are welcome to email me and I can just copy and paste from those AD memos as well with those instructions. Yeah, that was unfortunately when any operating system does updates, we don't get notifications, until they drop. We will always encourage you for all of our assessments, and I'm sure Elise can sing back up on this. Don't have automatic updates turned on any testing devices because, we want to be able to test those updates with our secure platforms in browsers first, and then we can issue a fix or say just don't update because the fix will take a long time. So always make sure that you're communicating with your technology coordinators and say, yeah, we don't want automatic updates on any devices that are going to be used for testing. So yeah, there will be a permanent fix to the spacing issue next year. But unfortunately, the workaround right now during testing, we would have to close down the secure browser to update that, and that's not an option. So yes, but thank you for bringing that up. Also, another thing with the printing error, again, just so you all know, that wasn't a WIDA or DRC thing. It was actually the actual printer that they contract with that printed things wrong, unfortunately. So costly mistake on that printer's part. Let's see. Is there any accommodation for a student with an IEP who is refusing to test? I don't think Tracy's on because I do believe she's under the weather today. But when it comes to students refusing to test.
Hey, Megan, this is Jessica. I can jump in on for that question. I was just responding in chat. No, there's not an accommodation for that. A student that is not an accommodation for a student to have that autonomy to not test. Students cannot make that choice. So if a student does refuse to test and you are currently in a testing situation, my recommendation is to have whoever is in the room with that student contact, like your site testing coordinator. And sometimes, making a phone call home to parents or just talking with the student, but that's a behavior. So an IEP team is going to best know that student and how to work through that issue. Otherwise, if they will not test at all, you'll have to defer to documenting that correctly with their participation codes, which Maureen and Elise can jump in and say what those are.
Right. And in WIDA AMS, the participation codes are a little different. Another option would be you could always try to do a paper access. So for students where online testing may not be the right thing and you need to maybe do this one-on-one with a paper access test, you can still order the paper access. Again, that window for ordering materials is open till the 28th. Maybe consider doing a paper test administration one-on-one with that student. And then ultimately still, if a student refuses to test in AMS, you'll want to go and mark each domain as do not score and declined. So, and then of course, for students that are absent, and not coming, you would want to go in and mark those students as well in AMS as do not score absent. So because AMS is a little different and we cannot have, it doesn't accept the participation codes like our other tests do. So we on the back end apply those codes, correct, Maureen?
Sorry. Yes, that's correct. There is some mapping between WIDA participation codes, I think, and our participation codes.
WIDA is a little different than all of our other assessments, so, keeps you all on your toes. Sorry about that. In the chat, I just do want to note that, it seems like people are seeing success with having safe, open, conversations with families, trying to get them to come in. I will say, based on what I've heard from LEAs and colleagues around the state, one of the biggest issues for why students have not been coming to school for this specific population actually has been a transportation concern where parents are not actually wanting to actually drive because of other issues currently happening in the country, trying to keep this high level vague. So driving and transportation is actually one of the biggest concerns for getting students there. I would just say, how can our LEAs be creative in helping to address the transportation issue? Is there a way that you could maybe say, let's maybe have some grassroots efforts for carpooling, or, I know busing's probably not going to be an issue to say, let's create new bus routes. Probably not going to happen. But, like what are are some different avenues for how can we get students to school safely with adults that do feel comfortable driving students to school. So what kind of grassroots efforts can we make with maybe carpooling, walking groups, where it would be safe? I know these aren't the best options, but does anyone have any other ideas, since the transportation issue was probably the top concern that I heard for getting these students there? Again, welcome you to come off of mute if Emily allows it, or put that in the chat as well. Trying to give some good wait time here. Okay, well, no one's begging to come off a chat today. I get it. Y'all are in your winter snowy hibernation right now. But please reach out to us. The next slide, again, does have our contact information. I have had some LEAs reach out recently to say, can we just set up a virtual meeting and just have a good thought partnership, and we can ask questions, maybe get some pointers on what's working in other states even, or other LEAs. If you want that to be an option, we can make that happen. We want to be there to support you through this. We understand that a lot of things are happening at a national level that is affecting this population right now. And we care, and we're trying to do the best we can as well. We're keeping an eye on everything. And as things continue to shift and change, we will do our best to communicate everything to you, and again, to support you. The more you can communicate to us your needs and ways in which we can support you, the better. If we don't know, then we can't act on it. So thank you all. And again, more to come. And if anything changes as far as accountability, Sid will make sure that she sends that out to everyone. Carolyn, okay, I like this wish list. Please request they bring back the live interactive donut on student status. Okay, I can put that request in. I believe the test monitoring application replaced that, but I can put that plug in for sure. All right. I believe it is now Jared and Acadians in Dallas.
Looks like we had one other question for Maureen with some of the codes for UFA. Maureen, do you see that in the text? Maybe respond to that about the UFA students participating on tests and scores.
I do see it, and I will respond.
Perfect. Thank you.
Emily, will you go ahead and go to the next slide, please? Okay, so we have our deadline coming up for MOI data entry, which is February 28th. So please make sure that you have all of your data entered by that day. There's also a link here for the parent letters that need to be sent home, both a sample for reading and a sample for math. And Jared, feel free to jump in if there's anything else that you want to say too. I think, Emily, if we could go to the next one.
I can jump in here. So I had a district reach out with a question regarding the, IXL diagnostic assessments. They're considering, they're using something and they're considering moving to IXL, and they just wanted to speak with districts or charter schools that may use IXL, have some feedback that they could utilize to make a good decision. On the slides, I've included a link to a Google form just with a contact information question. So it would just give name and phone number, email, if you're willing and interested to be able to share your thoughts with when a district contacts you. So please feel free to fill that out so that we can help the district out in getting more information. Next slide. And then this has been shared in months past, but just as a reminder, please make sure the schools within your district, or if you're a charter school with a district type format, you have multiple schools, please make sure that all the schools are on the same page as far as which system they're using for Acadience Math. We've had some schools that due to the functionality of the system, teachers in grades 4 through 6 go in to enter scores. They see that they can enter those for digitally, and they do that without realizing that they're taking licenses away from the students in grades K through 3. So just a reminder to pay attention to that and make sure that you're doing as much as you can to take care of that. If you do find that there's an issue and that some kind of code is popping up saying you need more licenses for whatever reason, you can reach out to Hillary there, or just feel free to reach out to myself and we can get it solved. Next slide.
So with the MOI window wrapping up, we're going to start looking towards EOY. And if you have anyone who needs to be trained on the Acadience reading the ALO platform, or how the test is ran, the different submeasures within the test and what is actually assessed for the students, there will be a MIDAS course offered on Acadience Reading Essentials. So please feel free to sign up for that. You can stay with me all day long and go through all of the assessments, or you can sign up for specific grade levels. So that MIDAS course is listed there. It will be held on March 27th. And there will be an additional need for a touchscreen device to practice on as we're going through those courses and those practice assessments. Please feel free, if you have any questions about this course, please feel free to reach out to me. Thank you.
Right. And like was mentioned earlier, Tracy's not available today, so I'm going to be talking a little bit about DLM and some of the updates, things to be reminded of. So the first thing is that the spring window is opening fairly quickly. So just a reminder about what grades are being assessed and the content. The window opens March 10th and is available until June 6th. Remember that if you have teachers or students that are participating in those instructionally embedded, the benchmark-like through-year assessments, those actually close tomorrow, but they have been available. They're the benchmarks for students who participate in the DLM assessment. That can be those assessments that help drive those instructional decisions. Those close tomorrow, though. So if you have not used those, just a reminder that they're available. You've got one day to use them. Remember that the DLM is for those students with the most significant cognitive disabilities, and we have our alternate achievement standards, those essential element standards that this assessment is aligned to. There's a link on the slides for the DLM webpage. Just a reminder that the students, so on our next slide, we have the KITE student portal, making sure that any student that's participating on the assessment on the computer needs to have the secure browser downloaded. It is updated yearly, so if you have not downloaded that secure browser yet this year on any student devices, those will need to be added to the student device so students can participate on computer-based assessments in DLM. We have a to-do list for those that are about to start administering DLM. So a good reminder, the first thing to do is to make sure that you do have a district coordinator role assigned in your LEA, because that person with the district coordinator role is the one that's going to be able to create those teacher accounts, making sure that you have paraeducators set up and everything ready to go in the system. So first step, make sure you've got a district coordinator, and then the next step is making sure that they have done the things they need to do to make sure your teachers that will be administering or your paras that will be administering have those accounts set up. Reminder that for teacher accounts, you have to have that Cactus ID for the unique educator identifier. And then for a proctor, you can use their email address as that educator identifier. All test administrators or people that are helping with administration need to have participated. So I want to say that more clearly because we had a question about this. If it's a person that's in the room as the second proctor, they don't necessarily have participated in gone through the actual training, but the people who are administering the assessment must have taken the DLM required training. So if you have questions on that, we can discuss more. Paraeducators can have access to the testing tickets, but they must have, if they are administering the assessment, they have to have participated in the training, and then they have to have access to those tips pages so that they can actually know how to administer each of those items on the assessment, especially if they're doing the one-on-one, not the students participating on the computer. Also, you need to double check with the students that they have that PNP and the first contact data into the system. Those, you cannot make changes on those, but they do have to be there in order for the students to actually start testing. So on the next slide, we have some information about the rosters and creating the rosters. Remember that the students are automatically rostered into DLM through UTREX. It has to be indicated in your SIS system or in the student's Scrum record that they have that 1% flag, and that's how they get automatically rostered into DLM. So it's set by your SIS system with that 1% flag. All those rosters are created by the district test coordinator. So there's a link to the Padlet here, and there's a link in a couple of slides as well for the district user role to talk about how do you create those rosters, how do you add users, any of the things that you would need to know as a district coordinator is on that Padlet. The roster name should be the last name and the org number and the subject. So you can see some examples, and you should be seeing a student with an ELA, a math in 3rd grade, and then ELA math and science in 4th grade and above. Students won't receive any testlets until they have a roster for each of the subjects. And then just a reminder for the teachers who will be participating in administration. All teachers must have completed that required training in the educator portal. So anybody who's participating in administering the assessment must have completed the required training in educator portal. You should check again that all students have a roster for each one of the subjects, that they have that PNP created and set that has the accessibilities or accommodations for the students. Reminder that that first contact survey has to be done because that's how it directs the students into their first testlet. So that first contact survey is what helps determine the level of the questions that the student will get when they first start that first testlet. So they have to have that completed to start testing. And then students will get their testing tickets. Teachers and anyone who's administering the assessment, again, needs to look at the test information pages, those tips pages, before they start administering the test. Those are what's going to be what's directing the teacher as to what materials they need and how they're administering any of those items on the assessment. It is something that Tracy looks at. She monitors that, who's accessing those tips pages. So just a good reminder for anybody, and Tracy goes over that in her training multiple times, that that those tips pages are essential and part of what you should be looking at to administer the assessment. So there's a checklist found on the DLM administration for teachers that's linked there that you can refer people back to as they're preparing to administer the assessment. So just a reminder, we've looked at some numbers as of yesterday. These were updated. We have students, 4,519 students that are enrolled in DLM currently. We have a little over 500, almost 600 students that are not on rosters yet. So for ELA Math and Science, and I think it's moving to our next slide, I think it's just delayed. So you can see these numbers instead of me just rattling off some numbers. But between 500 and 600 students that are not on rosters yet, which means that we need to be checking they have that P&P data set and that they have the first contact survey information, as well as making sure that they have something for each one of the content areas so they can fully roster. We have almost 2,000 teacher roles that are active or pending, but of those, so far this year, we've only had 598 of those people complete training. So a good reminder that if we have educators that are participating in administering the assessment this year, they need to complete that training in the DLM system. And then we still have a little over 2,500 students that need that first contact survey completed. Remember, that's where it knows how to direct students into which level they'll be participating in. So we need to have that first contact survey completed before the students can actually be given a testlet to start testing. So just a reminder on some of the steps that you need to do before students can start testing on that March 10th window. The next slide just shows links again to the Padlet. So these Padlets are great resources for the district users and teachers to go in and take a look at trainings, take a look at checklists, what do I need to do if you have questions on rostering for the district users, on administering things, how to access those tips pages for the teachers. The Padlets are great resources. So if you have any questions, and the next slide is the contact information for Tracy. Please reach out to Tracy or myself. I'm happy to try and answer some of the questions as well, and links to other resources that are available on our website or on this slide as well. So reach out if you have questions on DLM, and make sure people are getting trained and those first contact surveys are done so students can receive testlets. All right, thank you. And actually, I think we're probably at a good stopping break for point for a little break. So I'm wondering if we take a quick 10-minute stretch break and come back at, let's see, it'd be 10:33. So we'll take a break until 10:33 and then come back and jump into RISE information. Right. Well, hopefully you had a nice quick break. We're able to stand up and stretch for a moment. And I think we are ready to jump back in and switch back over to Elise. I know there's a couple of questions about UFA and accommodations in to respond to those. Thank you.
All right, for RISE, as a reminder, our state window opens March 11th and it closes June 6th, and your 8-week window for your LEA needs to fall within that window, as well as not testing during your last week of school. So just kind of keep that in mind. Just some general RISE information. The training that we had last week has been posted to YouTube, and the slide deck is accessible through Midas if you were able to register. And then also the new cluster and writing benchmarks, as well as the new writing training tests, are available and live in the system now, and you can begin utilizing those with students. A couple of things I wanted to just kind of touch on really quickly. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Just as a reminder, with prepping for RISE and familiarizing students with the system and its functionality, the training tests are available at any time, and there's two different kinds. There's the public training tests as well as the secure version of the training tests. So the one that just says system training tests, that one can be used at any time by anyone at home, as school, day or night, without a proctor, showing to parents, any of those things. whereas the test administration system version is the secure version where students would be required to have their SSID and a live session code would need to be typed in, but it really mirrors the summative administration process if you are looking to do that. I have had some questions regarding the Spanish adaptive functionality, so I'm going to kind of hit on that a little bit as well. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Remember that the training test is also provided for students in the Spanish adaptive version. You just have to set that appropriately. There is detailed guidance in the TAM on how to do that. It is encouraged for students who have the Spanish adaptive functionality added to their student profile that they access and use the training test with that functionality as well, so that they're familiar with how it will work once they're in the system for a summative administration. Okay. If you are unsure if your student qualifies for Spanish adaptive functionality, there is guidance in the TAM on page 40 that will go through the requirements necessary for a student to have that available for them during the test. Okay. If that does become available to them, go ahead and go to the next slide. They are going to be provided with another global tool. This is not available for every student. This is only if the Spanish adaptive functionality has been applied to the student's account, where they can then switch with this little world, this little globe tool, and it's going to switch from Spanish to English and toggle back and forth as needed. And the student can use that. And again, it can be practiced with the training test. Okay. With that, we are going to go on to some exceptional accommodation requests. I believe Jessica is back online, but I want to make sure.
Yes, I am here.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, so this goes for any of our assessments. This is not specific to any one assessment. Keep in mind when you are reviewing accommodations as we're coming up in our spring summative window, if there is something that's not outlined in a test administration manual and you aren't sure what the answer is, before you say no to a team or a special education teacher asking about a specific accommodation that is unique and we don't outline in a manual, please consider that we have an exceptional accommodations request form for these cases. So please ask first before you say no, because we want to ensure that what a student is using instructionally, to the extent possible, as long as it's not invalidating our construct of our test, that we are considering those accommodations for our students. And so this is a form that links you to that request form, and there is guidance on this form on submitting it to USBE for approval. You can go on, Emily. Okay, so but specific to RISE accommodations, please ensure that you are starting to make those submissions and following guidance in the TIDE user guide, and specifically be aware of any accommodations that require state approval, that you are submitting those in a timely manner and not waiting until a couple of days before the student is going to participate in testing, because there's no guarantee that they will be applied to their TIDE settings, and that would be denying that student FAPE if they don't have access to the accommodations that are outlined in a legal document. Teachers this year can go in TIDE and check to see what accommodations have been set. Previously, when teachers entered TIDE on that account level, they weren't able to see if those state level requests had been approved, but they can this year, and that guidance is also in the TAM for them to take those steps to double check. And that's just an additional layer of double checking, so multiple people have a chance to review and ensure those accommodations are set appropriately before a student starts that test. Next slide. And this is not me. So.
This is me, sorry.
Okay.
Could not get to mute fast enough. All right. We are happy to announce a one-pager. This was something asked for in earlier AD meetings. So This one pager, which is linked on the slides, and again, we will link in the chat in a moment, and I'm still now having to also go back and link our WIDA guidance as well. That I will do. Sorry about that. But this one pager has all the RISE ELA updates that you can share with teachers. So we highly, highly encourage you to share this with everyone in your LEA. We still get numerous questions on a daily basis about all the changes to RISE. We still get people asking where the interim assessments are and questions about the writing benchmarks and stuff like that. So please share this with everyone so they are aware of all the changes that have been made to RISE ELA and writing. All right, and then next, what are all those changes? Again, some of this is actually updated information. The reading clusters are now live. Those went live, I believe, earlier this week. So you can now let all of your ELA teachers know that the ELA clusters benchmarks are now live. Please do note that the scoring's a little different. If you have any questions, sorry, Elise, ask Elise about the scoring for benchmarks and how that's all reported in the reporting system. But clusters are now live. The writing benchmark field test, we have been communicating this with anyone that did sign up. That is now live. That went live this week as well. You're going to give the writing benchmark field test through the RISE portal and the regular test administration. So the students are going to log in through the RISE Secure browser like usual. It's just like giving a benchmark. Please do note, though, that we have extended this field test, writing benchmark field test opportunity all the way into June. We really, really need your all's help. Some of you have been amazing and you're like, hey, we're just going to have our entire LEA participate in this. We are still begging for participants. Again, if we do not get 5,000 student responses per writing benchmark, we're not going to be able to have them in the future. So please, as much help as you can, get for us, that will be hugely appreciated. Again, this is for all grades. Benchmarks are for all grades, grades 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So, and at this point, if teachers did not sign up, they don't need to sign up. Teresa can forward the communication that was sent to all educators that did sign up. If you want to blast that out with instructions on how to participate in this field test, but it really is open to anyone. We just need as many people as possible to participate in this. Please do just remember, we understand the drawback that you cannot see student responses. We get that that's a little bit of a, we don't want to do it then. But in order for us to have these in the future where they can see the student responses, we do have to go through this field test. Again, you no longer need to sign up for the field test. They're just available now through the RISE portal to give. Correct, Teresa? Thumbs up? Yeah, that's what I thought. So writing resources, the writing training test is now available. That has been updated, so students can now see the new prompt language that they should be expecting on the summative test and in the benchmarks as well for writing. The RISE writing rubrics are also available through the portal under resources. So you can see how students are going to be assessed on writing for the benchmarks and the summative as well. And we are currently working on annotated writing samples that are annotated per our new updated rubrics. Okay, we are working on those right now, and we are hoping to have those posted within the next month. We just received those back from CAI, so we are working on getting those posted. But all of those resources, though, aside from the annotated ones, are all available. I do believe there were a couple of questions. I'm not sure if they were.
They've been answered, Megan.
Okay, awesome. Reach out if you do have any questions. We're happy to help, but yeah, as many people as possible so we can have the writing benchmarks available for all Utah educators next year. Please. Okay. I think that's it. Math clusters is not me.
Jared, I think you were going to do the first few if you still want to do that.
Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah. Okay, we're going to talk about math clusters that are now available, as you can see, this week. Next slide. All right, so if you're familiar with the RISE science assessment, you will be familiar with the cluster type format. And so we're introducing the benchmark or clusters for benchmark questions. And so you have some information here on exactly what a cluster is. You've got on the left side, there will be a stimulus. And then there will be a directive for students to use the right side as they walk through answering questions to come to kind of an ultimate answer at the end to respond to what the stimulus is guiding the student to do. So there's multiple parts and that help students as they go through the question. Well, let's just go to the next slide and we'll go there. All right, so as far as how they're structured, this is what I was trying to say. It's much simpler here. So the interactions, they're just opportunities where a student will interact with the question. So as a student interacts with each of the different parts of the question, whether that's multiple choice or the different item types, those interactions are designed that part A leads to part B to part C and so on, to ultimately respond to, as you can see on bullet point 3, there's a task statement, which is in the stimulus. So all of those parts lead a student to be able to respond to what that task is and to be able to ultimately answer the stimulus. And so these math clusters, we now have, go ahead to the next slide. All right, so the idea behind this is rather than just provide a multiple choice question to a student to answer, these are more real life scenario to help students think through it, maybe introduce additional problem solving, those type of things, the math practices, as well as just the content. And you can see there is dependent scoring. So this also allows if a student is responding to part A and for whatever reason they enter an incorrect answer, but they carry that incorrect answer through to the different other parts of that cluster, they can still get those other parts correct and not be penalized for missing part A, and now they've missed the entire cluster. So it's dependent that way, which is nice. There are also scoring assertions similar to the science, like I mentioned, that allow us to be able to see how students are doing on specific content, whether they know or are struggling with that content. The last number 5 bullet point there, and this happened last year as well, but there will be field test clusters on the summative math test, and about 25% of students will see those. They are field tests to help us get data related to each of the clusters, but they won't count as part of the student's score on the summative test. Next slide. So here's an example. So on the left side, and this is a little small, but the idea on the left side, you have some information. It kind of sets up the cluster. There's some measurements and other information that the student needs as they respond to this cluster. And then you have that your task statement at the end that gives the student guidance on what are they going to be doing. And then on the right side, the different parts of the cluster are there. Students can just work their way through each of the parts to respond to those, ultimately in then answering and responding to that your task statement. And I think, yeah, you can go to the next slide. All right, Katie.
All right, thanks, Jared. Just to also clarify a point Jared made about the math clusters being field test items, again, during our summative spring session. If a student sees a cluster during our summative testing window, they will only see one math cluster. So just expect that it'll only be the one cluster item. They won't see multiple during that testing season. So for our benchmarks, we do have varying amounts here available for our students depending on the grade level. So you'll see for grade 6, we want to make very clear that grade 6 clusters are allowed a calculator. So they will be in the calculator section of the test. And for summative purposes, they will also be in the second segment where 6th graders have a calculator if they do see a field test item this spring. Go ahead to the next slide, Emily. This has not been posted yet as of this morning, but we will be having the module directory updated with clusters. This is generally what it will look like. You can see with the red box that they will be pretty clear in the benchmark module name that it is a cluster. Similar to ELA as well, they are their own benchmarks. So they're not embedded in the forms that are already in existence. They will be separate. And you'll see also in the test name, in this example, it says 3NF. That NF will reflect which strand is aligned in the standards. Because this is a cluster, there could be multiple strands. In this particular example, they're all NF. But we do have, for some of our other clusters, several other standards that are aligned, and there will be multiple strands. Those will show up in the test name as well once the directory is updated. Go ahead to the next one.
Oh, Katie, just real quick on that last slide. CAI is trying to get the descriptions in on that form. They're putting some description text for each of the clusters so you get kind of an idea. We decided to get it posted sooner rather than later. So it will be posted and there might be descriptions that will be coming, but teachers will have the information as far as standards, and all that information that Katie shared, other than just a brief description on the form.
Yeah, thanks. So if the description's not there yet, just know it is coming once that's been updated from CAI. This will be especially, I think, important for secondary teachers who are more specialized in teaching math only and have not had access to science clusters or ELA clusters before. But when teachers are administering a cluster benchmark from the TA interface, they will not see the interactions progress as far as the progress bar shows on their end. Because it's technically one item, the interface will just say it's either 0% answered or it's 100% answered, and it will not track interaction by interaction or part by part. So that the progress bar will just say it's either been started or completed along with the 0% or 100%. So if you go on to the next slide, it just has a very quick animation that shows what the teachers will see from their end when they administer the cluster. So there's the first one. Student started it but hasn't answered anything. As soon as they answer one interaction, it now will say 100% answered, but note it still says started. And then click again. Once they are done and they submit their test, it will now say completed, 100% answered. So those are what our teachers will see from their interface as students are interacting with the cluster. Next slide, please. When students submit their clusters, they will get immediate scoring. So you can see here it has a raw score associated with their submission, and then the test name will be there as well with cluster in the name. Next slide, please. And when teachers pull up their reporting, similar to their other benchmarks, they can still see the rubric. This just shows really fast if you click Emily that we need to expand the total items. And if you click again, you'll get to that number 1 above the 9 points that are available in this example cluster. That clickable number 1 will give you access to the rubric. So we'll go to the next slide. And that will show where there's the tabs for the item and score and the rubric and resources. Go ahead and click, Emily. The item and score tab, teachers will see the entire cluster start to finish, so they have access to all the parts, what that looks like. And then if you click again, Emily, I just want to note here that because there are multiple standards tied to a cluster, the name here will say undesignated math. That is on purpose. But it will say the grade level. So here, this is a grade 7 example. It'll say 7 undesignated math for the cluster. Next slide, please. And this is a quick example of what the rubric could look like for the cluster itself. So when teachers are looking at how students are gaining points, this goes back to what Jared presented earlier, that dependent scoring is a big part of our cluster layout. So we'll see the answer key here. The answers that are provided in the rubric example are what we would consider the absolute correct answer. But because there are dependent scoring options or availability, students can still get points for their answers if they happen to get an incorrect answer to start, but then carry that through correctly to the following interactions. So everything that's highlighted in yellow has the verbiage for what that looks like if it's a dependent scoring point. In addition to that, we also see the standard or the math practice that's a line for every point at the end in parentheses. You can see there's an MP1 for the very first point. Math practice 1 is what we're tying that to, and so forth. Okay, on to the next slide, please. And just as a quick reminder, our clusters are still on the training test, and I know Elise touched on this before as well. For grades 3 to 5, you'll see a cluster example in item number 3. Grade 6, that is number 17, because we did want to make sure that was in the calculator section, so a little further in, and number 3 in grades 7 and 8. And then the next slide just has our contact information. Please reach out if you have any questions about those. Those benchmarks and their clusters are live now, and then the directory will be updated as we get more information from CAI. I think that's it for me.
And I will just jump in real fast and add that the information around looking at the scoring and the reporting and how all of those assertions work is the exact same for ELA. So we didn't do slides for ELA and math because that would just be telling you the same information over again. But it works the same, and the guides are there for ELA as well as, or will be shortly for ELA as well as for math.
Can I jump in real quick? Is that all right? Sid, is this a good time? All right. So we had a question that we'd like to bring forward, and we felt like maybe this is a good time before moving on. It connects a little bit with the RISE as well as Acadience. I'm going to put in the chat, I think I got it all, the question that came to me. So the question is about, for our early grades, especially K through 6, we have quite a few different measurement tools in our toolbox, essentially. We have Acadience, we have RISE, to be able to get us some data connected with how students are doing and to help improve the learning. But the question is specific to grades 7 through 12, math and reading data. And I'm sharing this just because the question came to me, but really Katie and Megan are your go-to for ELA and math in grades 7 through 12. But are there ideas out there or thoughts on how to get data to support the learning for students in grades 7 through 12? And I'll throw that question out there, and whether you want to come off mute and share or put in the chat some ideas on how you get data for those students to be able to support their learning. And maybe that's a popular question for everyone.
Jared, I can come off really quickly. I dropped this in the chat. Just as a reminder that the RISE ELA interim assessments will be back next year. They have not been available this year. As we discussed earlier, that we realize only goes to grade 8. Obviously, depending on the legislation for SB 39 for grades 9 and 10, that could change things as well. But stay tuned for that. As far as 11th grade, I think Scott could actually speak more to different resources related to ACT that are available for students. And then, unfortunately, there is not a ton for grade 12. But I would encourage our various LEA assessment directors to come off and share what they use in their LEAs. I do believe quite a few LEAs actually use, while it's not a state endorsed or provided assessment. I know a lot of LEAs do use MAP, I believe, for high school. So yeah, we would love to hear your thoughts, and let Katie and Scott maybe jump in here as well.
Well, for ACT, we have Shmoop. And so if you're not using Shmoop already and you'd like to, you just reach out to Shmoop at support.shmoop.com and tell them you'd like to get your school signed up, because it's already paid for. And so I'll put that in the chat, but we have quite a few of our schools already using it. And I just last week helped someone else sign up for it. So There it is in the chat, but like I said, it's paid for the entire state, and they've got all kinds of programs, not just for allowing you to prep for ACT, but also that they have different lessons and things for reteaching. And so if you have a kid who's having trouble with, I don't know, inequalities in math, you can have them actually watch a tutorial lesson on inequalities and then take a quiz and see if they had any improvement on that section that you're trying to support them in terms of their academic progress.
That's a good resource, Scott. Thanks for math as well. And I saw Aaron put in the chat that Alex diagnostic data as well is being used. And I know a few LEAs use that. UTIPS is available for secondary math 1, 2, and 3. But as Elise pointed out earlier, in today's training, those are still draft form. They're not fully finalized, and alignment is spotty here and there for standards. And then for 7 and 8, we have our RISE interim and benchmarks available. So I think especially for those upper grades, if you have an interim assessment or something you're using for mid-year data collection, share that in the chat. And I know some districts are creating their own like quarterly benchmarks, things like that. Or if you're pulling something from a curriculum you have, let us know what you're using. It could be helpful for somebody else who needs some ideas.
Go ahead, Megan.
I was just going to say, Teresa and I just recently attended a reading conference, and we actually picked the brains of several vendors throughout the country. And a lot of vendors are finally starting to see the need when it comes to reading for more reading screeners, reading diagnostics, and reading interims. In the secondary grades, several of those vendors, and we're not going to drop any names because honestly, I cannot remember all of them off the top of my head. But a lot of them are actually in the process of developing those different assessments. So, you know, I think finally vendors are realizing, oh, this isn't just an elementary need, this is a secondary need as well. Teresa, anything you'd want to add that from knowledge we gleaned from our recent conference?
I just think that there's more awareness as there's been this huge push for literacy in the primary grades, that we just don't have resources in our secondary grades. And people are seeing that. Some big companies are seeing that and are looking at how they can help fill that need.
I think that's a good callback to Angela's sharing of the NAEP data and the results that we're seeing, like with our 8th grade reading scores, and particularly our 50th, 75th, 90th percentile. Yeah, exactly what David Rockwood just put in the chat as well. I do want to highlight a couple of things. I know Superintendent Dixon in her message in our February board meeting highlighted that NAEP data as well, and considered looking at like secondary literacy and the decline that we've seen statewide, and something that would be to consider. I want to highlight something and calling back to our RISE benchmark usage study of the RISE benchmarks. When we took a look at who was using them and when, a reminder that by and large, many users, we see a huge spike in the late April, like the week of April 23rd-ish. Week, as we like to call them, the end of year preppers group, as they're administering a benchmark right before the end of the year. However, we did actually see some interesting data as we looked at the ELA use, so a RISE ELA benchmark, even a student who took at least one benchmark, their ELA scores, if they took an ELA benchmark, their ELA scores had a 0.036 standard deviation higher than those students on average, with all other considerations holding constant with the other variables. They did see an average of a 0.036 standard deviation higher with just a one benchmark administration. The students who were part of our continuous users groups with the ELA assessments, if they had those regular administrations of benchmarks throughout the year. Those students on ELA courses that were continuous users compared to those who were end of year test onlys, they were 0.07 standard deviations higher on the ELA summative assessment. So we did find some pretty good statistically significant comparisons when people were administering the RISE benchmarks continuously, comparing that to their scores on the summative assessment. So that's something to consider as well, which is a resource that's available to everyone.
Yeah, I don't know if there's any other discussion. That's great. There's been several in the chat, so I appreciate that. And thank you. I think we're good to move on, but appreciate the discussion and thoughts.
All right, we'll go ahead and continue with Utah Aspire Plus. The state's window of availability opens March 3rd, so just in a couple of weeks, and will continue through May 9th. We talked about prep tools for RISE, so I want to hit on our prep tools for Utah Aspire Plus as well. Remember that we have the question samplers as well as the TestNav tutorial for students and teachers. The question samplers are going to be able to provide you with the different item types. It's going to give you some more content-specific direction, but remember those are also kind of grade banded as well. There's also Spanish adaptive versions available for students to use there. The TestNav tutorial is very specific to the TestNav system itself. It's going to show students how to toggle back and forth between items. It's going to show them how to access any of the tools that are there available. And it just walks them through step by step how to do that. I would strongly suggest using the TestNav tutorial with your students. As we have gone out and done testing observations, there was actually one high school student in particular who was not moving between the items with the two little buttons at the top. The student would navigate to a drop-down menu and then pick the question that they wanted to go back and review, like question number 4, or then was moving, okay, so I was now on question 11, so now I've got to move to question 12, and they were trying to navigate through a drop-down menu that is great if you're going back to one specific question, but I could tell it was very cumbersome for the student as they were trying to just move forward one item at a time at the test, because they couldn't always remember what question item they were on the previous time that they'd looked. So little things like that a lot of times we might think our high school students don't need that type of very basic elementary guidance, and they do need that basic elementary guidance when it is a system that they are not familiar with. So I would just encourage you, please use both of those with your students, the question samplers as well as the TestNav tutorials. Remember that the question samplers have the public view version, just like the RISE one, where anybody can go and take them as many times as they want. Then there's also the secure question samplers, which are available through Atom, where you can practice a secure administration with those. And new this year, if you want to re-administer one of those question samplers in a secure setting, you can reach out to the Pearson Help Desk and they can reset that for you so you can do it more than one time where that has not been provided in the past. Okay, so just kind of be aware of that. Next slide.
Okay, and this one I already kind of, gave a spoiler alert in the chat, but we also have an ELA Changes one-pager for Utah Aspire Plus that you can share with all educators in your LEAs as well. So I linked that already, and I will link again just in case so you don't have to go scrolling through. I'll link all of those resources again, but again, this should highlight all the changes. I still am getting a lot of questions about, wait, there's not going to be an English subtest this year on UA Plus? Nope, that's been retired. This document should highlight those changes to the reading and English subtests. So, and again, hopefully this is a resource that you can just blast out there to all your ELA teachers. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask.
Okay, so the additional orders window just opened on February 17th. So please refer to the Utah Aspire Plus Test Administration Manual to be aware if you need to place an additional order. And this would be for things like Braille, large print, a paper copy of a test. You need to make certain that you were ordering these items at least 2 weeks prior to when the student is going to test so that there is enough time for Pearson to deliver these to your school. And if you need more information on what this looks like, if you look in the Test Administration Manual under accommodations, there is a chart, and under the column where it says enabling instructions is step-by-step details on what steps you need to take in order to make these orders. And just a reminder for Utah Aspire Plus, there's not a hard deadline. So that's just up to you to be aware of, okay, when is the student testing? When do I need to make these orders for these additional orders? So that's going to vary from LEA to LEA. Next. Another reminder for state approved accommodations for Utah Aspire Plus. These are entered into the ADAM system. This is different if you work with UA Plus and RISE. How this is enabled is different. So refer to the Test Administration Manual and be aware of how you operate this in the ADAM system, because in RISE, when you submit a state approved accommodation, I set those in TIDE for you, and you can just go back and check them. In ADAM for Utah Aspire Plus, it's different. I do not set those state approved accommodations. I give you the approval. It unlocks it and gives you or somebody at your LEA the ability to then make that setting. So just be aware of that so you don't miss that next step that the LEA has to take to ensure that that setting is correct for those students. Next slide.
Moving on to ACT. Wow, and it's not even 5 minutes before noon, so we're doing really well. Awesome. Most of this stuff is just reminders. For example, January 31st was the deadline to select which testing event you wanted. If you want testing event 1, it's too late. I can't even go in and select testing event 1. That had to be done by the 31st of January. Testing event 2, those needed to be selected by February 14th. There is, as of yesterday, I still could select test event 2, but that's going to change. So let's kick back on the previous slide, please. So a lot of this stuff is right in our schedule of events, right? And so you're going to be receiving initial materials based on which date you're selected for testing. Those initial materials are either a paper accommodated test materials, or for those of us who are testing online, the only thing you should be receiving are the paperwork for students so they can get into My ACT and set up their accounts. Everything else is online, so you may have to remember to go back and print anything off that you need in terms of proctoring materials and things like that. You print those yourselves now. Those do not come from ACT. You do not send them back to ACT. Now, if you already selected your testing window, great. You can take and you can assign additional students to that testing window because, students move. That's okay. And for the question in the chat, the paperwork for the students, you can give that to them before. There's an actual window in which they can take and do that. If you look here as early as the 17th, you could have distributed those out to students if they're in test event 1 and had them go ahead and log in and set up those accounts. And so you've got until March 10th to make sure all the training of your room supervisors and proctors are done. You got till March 20th to prepare your rooms and materials. Do make sure your rooms in TCM are set up and that you've got proctors and students assigned to those rooms. By March 11th, distribute those My ACT instructions to all your students. And by March 21st, you have until then, because that's right when testing is going to be starting to create test rooms. So testing starts before then, but things change. All of a sudden, we're going to move kids 3 kids missed, they're going to test the next day. We need to set up a new room. And so you can always do that. And these same things you're going to be doing for test event 2, I put these together on a slide because most of these things are happening before our next AD meeting. So go ahead and go to the next slide, Em. And so it's the same thing. You got the initial materials coming in. That'll be happening next month. You can still assign new students up until March 14th before the testing. Make sure your staff are trained, prepare your rooms. But then your MyACT materials you don't distribute until March 17th. And so because you're testing later, you didn't get that. MyACT paperwork should be coming in. Those materials will be coming in depending on which test event you had, Andrea, and which testing days are going to be your first testing day. And so if you didn't receive them yet, it's probably too soon. Anything for a new student, I don't know how long it's going to take ACT to get those things to you. Remember, we're not the only ones in the country they're shipping to. And so this is one of the reasons why you had to pick your testing events so far in the past, because they need to get their shipping department set to get all those materials gathered together for all the different schools in all the different states. And so that material should be coming for that new student. I just don't know how long it takes personally. But these are just the new dates. Remember, this is all in our scheduled events. And so any questions, a lot of times I get questions on these things, and I'm always referring you back to the scheduled events. If you're looking for materials, if you're looking for videos and training materials, that's on our Utah ACT site. We have a lot of different videos and materials from ACT there, including the test administration manuals and all the procedures and things you need to do. And don't forget, I don't personally use TCM. It's not something, I don't set up classes. I don't set up students to take the test. But also in TCM, when you log into that site, I do know that they do have a checklist for you and things you need to do. And so make sure you log in there to make, if someone in the school is supposed to be doing something, look over their shoulder that way and see if they've got everything done. And so that's most of our updates when it comes to getting ready for the updating tests. Going to the next slide, please remember any unused test documents, meaning students that missed the test, keep those materials for them. You don't have to send those back. You want to make sure they take the test. So if they missed testing for the first time and you had to change their date, keep those unused materials until they actually take the test. If they missed testing the first time, just change their test date in ACT Now. There is no need to contact us. You just go ahead and you used to have to do that in the past, if you remember. But you just go ahead and do that to whatever day works for them and works for you and your schools. And so there's a lot of opportunities. It's one of the reasons why we don't say things now like save testing event 3 for the end, because it used to just be a day and now it's a whole 9 days. And so within 72 hours of testing, ACT was very adamant, our call this week, to make sure you destroy securely any authorization tickets, any used scratch paper, and any room roster reports. So shred those things, securely destroy them within 72 hours of testing, please. You do not have to send them back to ACT. And then with online testing, like I said before, the only material you're going to get is the information sheets for the MyACT accounts and then any accommodated paper forms. And right now, the numbers are high. We have a lot more students right now registered to take the ACT, and we're looking forward to see how many of those scores actually go through, what percentage. In the past, we've always had about 89 to 91% participation rate with ACT, and it's going to be interesting to see where those go. But any questions? That's because I know that's my next slide coming up. Any questions about ACT besides the ones we've already had in the chat? Okay, I'm going to turn the time over to Jessica. She's got the last little things on ACT accommodations. Do students need headphones?
Okay, so I'm going to go over.
You got a question on headphones. I'm pretty sure I don't know if there's an accommodation for that, Jessica, but I know on the regular ACT, they don't.
If they had an accommodation for text-to-speech, they would. Okay, so I'm going to go over just some ACT accommodation information, and then y'all will be finished. So, our initial accommodation deadlines have passed. However, if you have had any students new to your LEA, if they just had a new, like their first time ever receiving a new IEP plan, not an updated one from previous years, but their initial IEP or an initial 504 plan, or rare circumstances where there was a change in grade level or like a medical emergency with a broken arm and the student can no longer use their arm to take the test. These are the few exceptions in which you have the opportunity to submit a qualified exceptions to the deadline form by March 7th. When you click on this form, the guidance that you need to submit this to the TAA is there for you. When you make the submission, you need to make certain that you are also including the QED form. Okay, so communicate within your LEA, communicate with your SPED directors to catch any of these new students that may have popped up since the initial deadline closed in January. Okay. And once this closes on March 7th, there is no additional deadline. So when there's the initial deadline in January, if you made a mistake, there's also that reconsideration window. But for this qualified exceptions to the deadline window, it closes on March 7th, no exceptions. Okay, next slide. Okay, I can't see the slide. I don't know if anybody else can. Okay. Here's just some guidance on checking your ACT accommodations from the ACT accessibility team, on some best practices on making certain that you confirm TAA pins and that those are applied to their student records in ACT Now. You should have received an email this week from ACT with information about receiving any additional materials for specific accommodations. So be certain that you have checked that email this week. If you didn't get it, reach out to me. I can forward you a copy of it. But if you're on their listserv, that went out on Tuesday or Wednesday, I believe. Make certain that you are contacting ACT if there was any errors in your shipment. You can also contact me, but the best place to start is contacting the ACT accommodations support line. If you did not receive materials as you should have, or if you notice any final errors in a student's expected accommodations, do not allow that student to start or complete a test. This violates FAPE, their free appropriate public education, and we need to take steps to be proactive before we see that error, or when we see that error. If a student has started a test and you discover an error, the best thing to do is to stop testing, contact ACT support team, and you can also contact me. Sometimes I can move that needle a little faster. Okay, next slide. So this information was in that email that went out earlier this week. February 18th. You should get a tracking report in a few weeks before your expected to test date. And these are the materials that you should also be looking to receive with these timelines that correlates with your testing date. Next slide. When you do receive your materials, ACT does ask that you are inspecting and checking in your materials against the packing list that should be included, and make certain that the test date flyer is accurate and has the correct materials that you've received. And just again, contact ACT immediately if there are any errors. Particularly for Braille, if you did not order the correct Braille the student is not going to be able to engage in that test. It's not going to be accessible to them. There's a couple of different Braille options that you could have ordered. So I would always check with the teacher, the visually impaired, to review that test booklet to ensure that that is the correct Braille before you open that book on test day. Because if a student goes to open that Braille book and it's not the correct Braille code, it's not going to be accessible at all to that student. And we can usually overnight the correct materials in those instances. All right, next slide. I think that might be it. Okay, and there was also just some non-test information that was sent out. So just a reminder, if you haven't read that email yet, students do need to complete their non-test information at least within 2 days after they take their test. And there are those instructions in your materials shipment. And then you also have the ability to print them from ACT Now. All right, next slide. And this is the specific ACT accommodations contact, and you can also reach out to myself if you have ACT accommodations questions. That's it for me.
Emily, thank you. I think I'm just going to have you advance through the slides. So this is just some updates for the groups, and thank you, assessment directors and the assessment team, for letting myself and Megan Tippett do a quick presentation. If you can advance to the next slide. So for everyone's information, we have a high school feedback report that comes from USHE. We've provided this for multiple years on the Tableau's website, but got very little usage or hits on the website. So to update this, we wanted to make sure that principals or superintendents, assessment directors and such, if you needed to get this information, that you could get it. So the update is inside of the My Tools on the Data Gateway, once you've logged in, under the graduation sub-menu, you'll see this link to USHE High School Feedback Report. Go ahead and advance to the next slide. And this is where you will see this is basically just a snapshot of the page. Basically, where do your students go after they leave your high school, the district, into what institution and such. So, by the way, this report also is available at an aggregate found on the USHE's website, but this one actually goes down to the school, so it does have the small N sizes included inside of here. But basically, just know up on the top, you're going to have a tab for a state, you're going to have a tab for its district, and you're going to have a tab for the school. You just need to click on those and be able to drill down into them. Again, it will show you how many of the students go to the different universities, what's the percentage on those, the time within the universities and such. So I wanted to make you aware of this information. Go ahead and move to the next slide. So you might be asking yourself, well, how do I get access to it? Oh, I guess you can't get access to it. We're not going to show it to you. Just kidding. Let's go to the next slide. There we go. That's never happened to anyone here. Thank you. So if you need to get permission to access this, the way you would do it is inside of the data gateway, you would go over to the accounts. You may need to use your LEA admin to set these permissions. Just depends on what you have access to. I believe most of you do have access to the graduation LEA user role. That's what you need to get access. And if you want to add this to like a principal or someone, the process is, again, you go into the data gateway, go into the roles. It's at the LEA level. It is not at the school level. But you you just assign them that graduation LEA user role, and then it will appear in their menu. Let's move on to the next page, or the next, advanced one. Here we go. I will let me just explain what's going on inside of here too. So the accountability indicator report, we found an issue in the advanced coursework indicator that we've been working on. We've been talking internally about this, and some more information will be coming out. But as we were reviewing it, we found the issue. The issue really was it's not on the overall school report card. It was in the indicator level of like TSI, ATSI and such. So anyway, we went in on the report and updated that information. I'll let Megan, I believe you're here if you want to talk about this. All right.
Yeah, I can talk about it. So we were notified, during some investigation, we figured out that we were underreporting CTE coursework in particular from the advanced coursework indicator when it came to what you saw in the accountability indicator report. What you see on the school report card has been correct, but we noticed this slight error with this accountability indicator report, which many of you have seen, as well as some TSI and ATSI, how we calculate the student group's school improvement designations. So this affected all schools that had a CTE program. So if you had some of our schools won't see as big of an impact here, big of a change in the numbers from what they were before to what they are showing now on the accountability indicator report. There were a few schools that this did impact their school improvement designation. Those LEAs that are impacted by that will be emailed directly by our accountability and school improvement teams, just to give you more information on how that goes. And if anybody has any questions about this, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to provide further detail. Yes, we will be including ADs, school improvement teams at the LE level, and CTE coordinators will be receiving that notification.
And that's all we have from data and statistics. So I think I'm the last person between you and lunch.
Well, thank you, Aaron and Megan, for attending. I know we'd had a request previously from some of the assessment directors stating that they had appreciated when our data and statistics team has attended our AD meetings to share some of the resources they have available and answer questions about data or things that statistics have come up. So thank you again for joining us, and we hope to have them join us regularly at our AD meetings. We are at the end of our slides. I don't know if there is any other questions from people as we are coming to the close of our meeting. Please go ahead and either put them in the text box in the chat box or raise your hand so you can come off mute, and we'll see if Emily allows it. I just wanted to thank you all again for attending and participating in the meeting today. Thank you especially to the USBE Assessment and Accountability staff. I really appreciate the work that all of them do to help support you and the students in the schools. If you ever have questions or need anything, please feel free to reach out. And in the meantime, look forward to the AD memo for next week with any additional information. And let us know if there's anything we can do to help. Thank you all.
Hey, Sid, I got a private chat. There were some issues with some of the links, I think, in the presentation. When I just clicked on the links, I couldn't open anything, but when I right-clicked the links and the menu came down with open the link, then I was able to access them. And I think, so if you are having the same issues that other people are having, that was my workaround. So
thank you, Megan. So accessing any of the links in the slideshow sounds like a right click will be the workaround. And again, if you come back to that slide deck later outside of this meeting and have issues with accessing those links, let us know and we can make sure to get those to people. I saw another question in the chat, as well as I've received 2 or 3 private messages about the data that I shared about the RISE benchmark usage. Came from a study that we have a student that was working on her doctorate and dissertation did for us over about 2 years, where she analyzed benchmark results from the 21, 22, and 23 school years and compared that with the summative 23 data. And then she reached out there was a second round of that information for the RISE benchmark study, where she reached out to those teachers who had been using the benchmarks and followed up with some questions about how they were using the benchmarks, what they found useful, ideas that they had for how to improve the benchmarks, and something that we've presented with our APAC and TAC members. As I was messaging with Darren, it's something we realized that when we got the results this past October, November, was in a middle of transition time with a lot of things with our assessment department, and we did not share that with you all yet. So next week in the memo, we're planning on sharing that RISE benchmark usage study. So those where I talked about the usage between the 0.036 for the one-time users and the 0.073 standard deviations improvement for those continuous users. We will share that in our AD memo next week. If you need that before then, I know the couple of people that reached out and said, hey, I'm presenting on something and this would be helpful. If you need it before the AD memo next Tuesday, let me know and I can share that with you prior to that, but know that that will be coming up. We'll make sure to share that with you all next week.
You have, thank you. It's Christine. Sorry. No, it's okay. Lots of people do that. I posed this question to Maureen. I contacted Tracy yesterday asking about the Utah Fits All, and specifically when it comes to testing accommodations when we normally put those in as a LEA in the platform based on the IEPs that we have on record.
Okay. So Christine, this is Jessica. If the student is part of the Utah Fits All Scholarship and they have an ISP, you would need to check with your special education director if they have one of those service plans. And if they have one of those service plans, they would have accommodations outlined in there. And then in that case, so just because, sorry, I was not in the chat, so I couldn't reply to you directly, but I did leave you a message in the chat.
Okay.
So yeah, if they have an ISP, you can do those accommodations. But if they do not have an ISP,
I see your face. It's a little tough, right?
They're not. If they are. To be quite honest, I have forwarded that question to our SPED leadership staff.
Okay.
I am not super familiar with the Utah Fits All Scholarship in their enrollment status, because if you're a homeschooled student, you are not receiving special education services.
Right.
But I'm not 110% sure on how those students are enrolled. And so that's my hesitation in giving you a better answer. Because if you're a private school, you can have an ISP. And, I know all that legal information, but I think there's also this other aspect of the Utah Fits All Scholarship to where, if
they have to pay for like special services. I've read through the code. I've read through the Utah. I'm trying to find the right.
Yeah, if
we're going to offer a
homeschooled and if their student is homeschooled only, and if a parent has chosen not to receive special education services, then we are under no obligation to provide accommodations to those students.
Okay.
The only case would be you do have to provide special education services under an ISP, and the special education director should know that. But for just any other kids, there's really no obligation to provide accommodations if a parent has not enacted their right under IDEA through their public school. So the only way you would know is
for the ones who we have that legal burden, it would be contacting the special education director and just say, do you have any students with an ISP under the Utah Fits All Scholarship? Otherwise, you wouldn't know. And if there is any other parents that reach out to you, I would say email me. It kind of seems like there's some gray area, even I was communicating with our SPED leadership during the meeting too about it. I think there's a little bit of nuances that there's not 100% clarity on answers.
Yeah,
so if there
that's
is
why I'm asking for sure.
Yeah,
if there's a lot of information about it, I'm like, I'm not 100% sure how we act here, because I'm getting that same feeling that you are. It's like, if we're just providing a test unless it says something else, right? And it says, even in there, it says that in the Utah Fits All information that I've read, that they can use their funds to pay for special services, right? So anyway.
Which I find very interesting that is stated, and we're having some internal conversations.
Okay.
Yeah, their website is interesting because feels like a lawsuit there, because under IDA, parents are not legally obliged to provide anything that burden falls on an LEA. So yeah, their language in that Utah Fits All Scholarship is interesting and doesn't really align with SPED law. So
Thank you.
I would just say check with your SPED director for ISPs. Those students would be covered. Any other student, if a parent reaches out to you and say, hey, can my child have this accommodation? I mean, I feel like the answer is going to be no, because you don't have any legally binding agreement to honor that request.
Okay.
But if you're not sure if there is that outlying situation, just email me and we can.
Sure. Okay. Thank you, Jessica, for addressing that and like talking within your department too, because it is a little bit confusing. Kind of like you said, there's a lot of gray area.
Yeah. Yeah. And if I can get a better answer, I'll email you. And if there's anything that I feel like is important, I can add it to the AD memo too for other people.
Perfect. And then Sid, I have one more question for you. Last time that we met, we talked a little bit about when they're doing observations about engagement. Did you ever come up with a solution for us to kind of preface our people on how you guys are determining engagement during testing?
Yeah, it was something we talked with internally afterwards. So this is as on our informal observation notes that we have as we're coming out to do test observations, a way that is more systematic, I guess, about tracking engagement. It's something that we discussed as a team and felt like it wasn't something that we were necessarily reporting. So while we were taking that look at options of what we could do to be more consistent within our observations in assessment, it was more that we were trying to get a feedback for a look at for ourselves of, does it seem like students are working through the questions, or are students like just clicking and busting through the options?
Yeah,
so
like doing a math problem and not writing any work down, and it's an 8th grade math problem that requires probably some paper.
Right. And it's something so we are making some adjustments to our observation forms, and actually I think we have completed those. I think, Emily, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we've updated all of those forms and they've been reattached to our website. But as far as, go ahead. Okay. But as far as changing them to specifics around if we had more direct notes for our assessment observations as far as what we were collecting, we decided that this wasn't anything that was evaluative. It was really more just for our information, not something that we would need to necessarily have inter-rater reliability, like something that you would do for like teacher evaluation or something like that, because it really was just for us to get more of an informal look at our students participating in the assessment, and does it seem like students are engaged in the process? So we updated some of the questions as far as what are the things that we're looking for, but as far as more specifics on a more formal observation, we decided that wasn't the purpose of these assessment observations, and didn't want them to feel more evaluative than they really are, really just observations for our information.
I appreciate your answer. Thank you, Sydney.
Yeah,
thank you, Emily,
thanks,
for
Christine.
giving me all the power to be off mute. Jessica, thank you for your work on that Utah Fits All business. And you guys have a great rest of your day. And if you're out there driving, be safe.
Yes, thank you. Thank you all.
Bye, guys.
Yeah, and if there are any other questions, we appreciate it again. I know Elise has been communicating with those of you in the Southwestern region about putting together those assessment observation schedules, and we're really close to having that finalized. So if you've been in contact with Elise about, I think I said Jessica, but I meant Elise if I did say Jessica. I'm looking at both of them on the screen. We're putting together those schedules and we should have those finalized pretty soon for the Southwestern region. Thank you again for all of you participating. And if you need anything from us, please don't hesitate to reach out. Thanks all.